Hey guys, it's Jericho2 here for runitones.com, and today I'm proud to present to you the first mini course in Run It Once history, Red Line Mastery, Outplaying Opponents Without Showdown by yours truly, the Jericho2. The first episode of this mini course will be Are Red Line Players Always Bluffing? Before we get into it, let me introduce the goal of this mini course, the purpose of this mini course. I want to make Runners Once users better red line players, better at winning at non-showdown, making them harder to play against. And I believe that we will achieve this by improving everybody's red line, making them bluff more, making them call more. It's an underrated part of the game, and I kind of want to shed light on it. So yeah, let's get into it, shall we? What does it mean being a red line player? Well, first of all, like poker graphs are made up of 4 different lines. You have the green line, which are going to be your straight up winnings or losses. You have the yellow line, or sometimes referred as the orange line, which is going to be your all in expected value adjusted winnings. So what does it mean, all in expected value adjusted winnings? If I were to get in aces versus kings pre and I would win, I would be running above EV, above expected value, because I'm supposed to win that pot on average 80% of the time. If I were to get in queens versus jacks and I were to lose, I would be running under EV, under expected value, because I lost the pot that I'm supposed to win 80% of the time. So the yellow line or orange line will kind of try to tell you how much you should have won given all the all-ins that occurred. The blue line, which is the third line, is the showdown winnings. So how often do you win whenever you table your hand, when you show down your hand? So you're on the river, you bet, they call, show the hands, or you're on the river, they bet, you call, you show the hand, or check, check, show down the hand. How often are you winning in that spot? Usually people kind of win a lot. That's how they make most of their money. They bet the river, they get called by worse, they show their hand. So usually that's the way people win most often on average. And the fourth line, the one we will be focusing on in this course, is the red line, aka non-showdown winnings. What does that mean? Whenever you 3-bet pre and they fold, you 4-bet pre and they fold, whenever you bet flop and they fold, whenever you raise turn and they fold, whenever you bet river or raise river and they fold, whenever you win a hand without showing down your hand, this will go into non-showdown winnings. It's also true for whenever you fold flop, fold pre, fold turn, this will go into your non-showdown winnings negatively, because you will be losing money without showing down your hand. Most people usually lose a decent amount in non-showdown winnings from what I've seen. And just to summarize a bit, the green line will be the sum of both showdown and non-showdown winnings. So in other words, blue line plus red line will equal your net winnings, aka green line. And just to show you an example, let's have a look at my overall PokerStars 2KNL graph, and I will show you the different lines. So I have played a bit more than 100 KNs on that stake. So this is the green line, which basically is your net winnings. So yeah, most people know that line on the graph. Now, if I were to go to show all in expected value, you can see that I was running more or less on par with EV expected value in most parts of the graph. And if I were to look at the end, I am probably running like 4 to 5K under EV there. So I was supposed to win 4 or 5K more than I did, given all the all-ins that occurred over those 100K ends. Now for the showdown lines, so we can see the red line being up quite a lot, most of the time carrying the graph. Did run pretty bad at the end. the blue line wasn't winning until what, like hand 65, until 65k hands. So yeah, I ran a bit bad there too. But yeah, overall, you can see that most of the graph was being carried by the red line, making most of the winnings of this graph. And you can see that the blue line plus the red line winnings will equal the green line winnings. So I hope this is clear for everybody. Now that we know what the lines mean, let's get into the depth of things. A couple of misconceptions that I often hear about being a red line player is that people assume that you are always bluffing. And don't get me wrong, bluffing or being aggressive is an important part about getting your red line up. However, the other important aspect about being a red line player that is often forgotten is calling. And I would say that calling is as important as bluffing. Whenever I'm teaching students about improving their red line, most of them will only focus on the bluffing aspect of the game. So finding the right combos, the right frequencies, being a pain in the ass to play, like just bluffing a lot, raising a lot. This is good. However, they tend to brush away the calling aspect. They kind of feel as if it's not being as important or as valuable as the bluffing aspect of the game. Personally, and from my experience, I would say that improving your calling skills will move your red line upwards way more than improving your bluffing skills. And it's a very underrated aspect of the game because usually calling is like, oh, whatever. You call strong hands, you fold the rest, but there's more to it. And so, just to summarize a little bit, to improve one's red line, we must work on both the bluffing aspect and the calling aspect. On average, like the most natural thing to do is just to focus on the bluffing aspect. So, like, don't feel bad if that's what your go-to sentiment is. I was like this too at the beginning. And the calling aspect is as important and usually will impact red line way more. Yeah, that's what I've experienced. Like whenever I started to work on my calling, my red line went up way more. So let's have a look at a few different graphs. We have here the blue line graph, which I would say 90 to 95% of players have a graph that is more or less similar to that. It's a graph that doesn't focus much on bluffing nor calling. Usually the blue line will be through the roof and the red line will be tanking. So usually the red line will be like a 45-degree angle, like going straight down. And it's the typical blue line winning player type of graph. So usually it's players that focus a lot on value betting, on getting called by worse. They don't really care too much about the bluffing aspect of the game, about the calling aspect of the game. They just try to make hands, get paid, move on. And I had a graph like this for a long time. I'm not gonna lie. Uh, I was I was a bit of a nit, and I was not bluffing much, and I was folding a lot. So yeah, I know good players that have a graph like this, but I think the best players usually will have other type of graphs that we'll get to. The next type of graph will be the break-even red line graph. So usually that will be a graph that focuses on bluffing, but disregards calling. So whenever I get students that want to improve their red line, they usually go from a blue line graph to a break-even red line graph. They start bluffing a lot. Usually their calling stays more or less the same, but they start bluffing a lot and then their red line kind of breaks even. And it's the typical like bluffing right frequencies type of graph. It's definitely an improvement, I believe, over the blue line graph. You're harder to play against, and it shows that you're willing to put the money in with air, with your bluffs. And yeah, I think a lot of good regulars have this type of graph. A lot of the best players at mid stakes, they have a graph more or less similar to this. And the last type of graph, the one that I aspire to bring my students to, is the red line graph. So it's a graph that will focus on bluffing and calling. Blue line usually will win or be break even, and the red line is the one carrying the graph, the one that will be winning heaps. And it's the typical bluffing and calling right frequencies type of graph. This is the hardest type of graph to achieve in no limit hold'em. It's really hard to do, in my opinion, because you need to study a lot of the bluffing aspect, a lot of the calling aspect, and your blue line, if it's winning, like it means that you're doing a lot right as well. I believe this is like peak no limit hold'em poker performance here. If you're able to get a graph like this, like you are on top of things. If a solver would play it, would more or less have a graph like this, winning a lot with red line and blue line winning as well. But yeah, just being carried by the red line. And I think the toughest players usually will have graphs like this. The ones that are aggressive, the ones that are willing to put the money in with air, the ones that are willing to make tough calls, they usually will have graphs like this. And yeah, this is, you can also call this a purple line graph when both red line and blue line are winning. Blue plus red usually equals purple. So yeah, that's a cool thing to have, in my opinion. Yeah. And just to end on a great on a cool note, this is my PokerStars 1K&L overall graph. You can see most of the winnings are with the red line. Ran really bad at the end here, and blue line got hit really hard. But you can see the red line most of the time like going upwards, carrying the graph, and just overall being aggressive, calling a lot, bluffing a lot, trying to be a pain in the ass to play against. Because those games are going to be tough, right? At 1K, at 2K, you're going to be playing a lot of 3-handed, playing against tough players. So you need to be aggressive. You need to call a lot. You need to bluff a lot. And I think if you can apply this to mid-stakes game, to small stakes game, then you're going to be ready for the higher stakes as well. So, and it's good things to put into motion. So yeah, this is what I aspire to bring you guys to, and this is what I aspire my students to get to as well. Welcome to episode number 2 of my mini course, Hold for Betting Galore. So it's pretty obvious today we'll be working on 4-betting. I'll try to explain to you why it's important with regards to the red line, and just to improve your overall cold 4-betting game. So let's get into it, shall we? First of all, what is cold 4-betting? So I'll just give you a quick example for those who are not familiar with this. Cutoff opens to 2.5 big blinds, button 3 bets to 9 big blind, then the big blind 4 bets, cold 4 bets basically, 23 big blind. It's called cold 4-betting because big blind was not involved in the hand prior and not put any voluntary money in the pot. Basically, it's when you're raising after 3-bet, but you're not the one who got 3-betted, right? So you were outside of the raiser and the 3-better. And cold 4-betting, no limit hold'em, like especially as a bluff, I feel like it's still quite not used as much as it should be, especially in 2024. It's a huge show of strength that puts an immense amount of pressure on both the opener, on two people, both the opener and the 3-better. And I believe that it's just a great move overall. What will cold 4-betting do? It will increase your red line winnings naturally, given how many folds one will get pre-flop or post-flop as well. So sometimes, like, yeah, you cold 4-bet, then they call, but then there's always like post-flop where you can make them fold and flop on turn, depending on the flop and the positions and all of that. So there's a lot going on there for you. It's not just about pre-flop, like it translates to post-flop as well. It helps to balance the times that you do have premiums as well. So you're going to be pretty face up if you're only like cold 4-betting ace, king, and queen plus. So adding bluffs to your range will help you be not as face up as as one might be. And it does not require a ton of studying. It's really rare, those spots in No Limit Hold'em, that don't require a lot of studying. But this is one of them. So because pre-flop and post-flop are quite straightforward in this note. So pre-flop, you just kind of need to learn the ranges, what you should be cold forbidding as a bluff and as value. And then like post-flop, the ranges are so small, and the SPR, the stack to pot ratio, is so small as well. Like there's not a lot of stack left, given how big the pot is, that there's not a lot to do to study. It's going to be a lot of betting small, or even some jamming on the flop. And yeah, so I really like this spot for this reason, for those reasons. Yeah. Let's talk about cold forbidding frequencies. Many new players, or players that are getting used to a new stakes, they usually will shy away from cold forbidding. I've seen it many times. So when cold forbidding as a bluff at a new stake, when you're cold forbidding as a bluff at a new stake, it's kind of nerve-wracking, and it's quite uncomfortable. It's more money. It's like, I'm doing this as a bluff. Nobody knows me. Yeah. However, it's a move that all great poker players use. Like every good reg will have cold forbid bluffs. So that's why it's so important to master. So many students that I have, sometimes they're struggling to have a win rate, and usually I'll have a look at their cold forbidding percentage, and I'll see it's around like 2.5%, which is super low. And whenever I look at the top players in my database, their cold forbidding percentage is always between 4 to 5%. And this is a huge difference, because one player just cold forbids the double, or 2.5x of what the other player is cold forbidding. So the player that is not cold forbidding enough is missing out on so much EV, so many spots that he should be taking down pre or post flop. And he's also, like I've mentioned, hindering himself when he has premiums, because people are going to be folding more if they see that he has a cold forbid of 2%, instead of if he has a cold forbid that is normal of like 4.5, 5%. Yeah, so this is what I want to try to shed light on today. In order to do so, let's have a look at my overall cold forbidding percentage in my 500NL database that has over 750k ends in there. So yeah, let's go have a look here. As you can see, I have in this database, I have way more hands than this at 500NL, but in this database, I have around 786k ends there. And this would be the cold forbidding stat, 4.78% of cold forbidding, which I think is a really good number. Got premiums, got bluffs, every position is covered. It's just really strong overall, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I would strive to get at least to 4.5 if I was a regular in some kind of small to mid stakes game. Just to be tougher to play against. At high stakes, I think this is between 4.5 and 5 is pretty good number to have. So we'll take a look at a few examples of cold forbidding with charts. So now that we know that we often should be cold forbidding, let's take a look at a few spots here that I have listed. So some are going to be a bit narrower in terms of ranges. Some are going to be a bit wider. So you can see like the UTG open. This is already strong. Cutoff 3-bets, and then small blind cold 4-bets. The ranges are going to be a bit tighter than the last spot, which is the widest spot, basically. Button open, small blind 3-bets, big blind cold 4-bets. So I will go in my server here, and we'll take a look at the first spot where UTG opens, cutoff 3-bets. So we can see cutoffs range here. Pretty standard cutoff 3-betting range, and small blind cold 4-bets. We can see that small blind cold 4-betting range is, even though it's narrow, it's a lot wider than what population does. We can see that there's some ace 5s, there's some ace 4s. They're not full frequencies, don't get me wrong. Like, it's definitely not always. Like 27% of the ace fives we can see here at the top or cold four betting. Only 9% of the ace four. But there's still some ace tens, some king tens, king jacks, king queen suited. Funnily enough, ace king off is not always a cold four bet here. It really values the suited aspect of the hand, given I guess how often it goes post flop. And obviously you have queens through aces, but you also have tens, nines, eights, sevens. 7-6 suited is in there, 3%. So even though it's a narrow range, there's still a lot that is getting cold four betted here, and I think most people are not doing this. Might not even do jacks. They're not doing this, and they're not doing this too much. So yeah, we can see it. How much more we should be cold four betting here, and we're a lot of people are definitely like missing out on some combos. The next spot, MP cutoff big blind. So let's get into MP cutoff. So cutoff three betting range versus MP big blind. So we can see here a bit more frequencies with the better combos, ace king off, jacks is now full frequency 10, nines and eights have more frequencies. Ace jack suited is in there half the time, 48%, and then ace five goes up to like 32. Ace four still a bit in there. So yeah, just strong overall range. I'm definitely not. I proud myself in cold four betting a decent amount. I'm definitely not doing enough of those like tens through eights here. I'm not gonna lie. Even I think I need to cold four bet a little bit more, I think, than what I'm doing because I'm missing out on a few combos. And the next spot would be cutoff button small blind. Okay, that's a really common spot as well. So the button here is going to be mixing obviously some flats and small blind cold four bet. We can see here that we have ace queen off now. We have the king jacks, the ace tens, the king tens. Tens is 3/4 of the time. Surprisingly enough, ace five is not more of a cold four, but now I guess it's because of the ranges. You kind of want him to have it so that he folds it some amount of the time, I guess, even though it's a pretty good bluffing head. And you have your usual suspects here, nines, eights. But yeah, just overall decent board coverage here. And I think in those positions, people are getting more or less this range. I don't think they have eights that often and nines that often. King 10 and ace 10 too, but I think they'll have the ace queen off. They'll have the king jack suited. It gets easier the wider the range is in my opinion. So yeah, and the last spot, which will be the widest spot in No Limit Hold'em with regards to cold four betting. Button opens, small blind three bets, and then big blind cold four bets. So we can see now that nines are almost full frequency, 89%, ace queen off. Ace queen off is not full frequency. I'm surprised by this. This is probably the one spot where maybe people are cold forbidding a bit more. Because I think people are just gonna go like full frequency with ace queen off. But yeah, queen jack suited. I'm not doing it as often as I should. King 10 suited too. I don't think so. I'm definitely like missing out. Even I am. I guess I'm missing out on those two combos. Ace 10 suited. I think some people might be missing on those combos here, and even perhaps nines. But yeah, overall, on average, way more combos that are being cold forbidded that the population is used to. And so, like I said, even I pride myself in cold forbidding a lot. I'm missing out on a few combos, definitely. So yeah, this is definitely a spot where everybody can improve, in my opinion. And it's not so hard to improve at that. It's just look at the ranges and then post-flop play, like I've mentioned. is kind of straightforward because of low SPR, because of how narrow the ranges are. So I think it's a really easy spot to get good at without much effort, if I were to phrase it in some way. And yeah, so cold four betting summary. So we saw that a couple of hands, a few hands that might not be natural for your average poker player to cold four bet. So as we saw, ace fives to ace fives, ace fours, the mid pocket pairs, the sevens through nines are definitely not standard. Ace 10 and king 10 suited, and ace queen off and queen jack suited in late position. So adding those bluff combos should ultimately increase your non-showdown winnings, red line, and result in an increase in win rate. So both because of pre-flop and also because of post-flop play, I think you will take down the pot a lot post-flop after cold four betting just by c-betting or just by jamming the turn or jamming the flop. So I think there's a lot to be made here with regards to red line. It does increase the overall variance of your game. I'm not gonna lie. You're gonna get it in spots where you're getting all in with top pair, the flatted aces. You get stacked, but that's part of the game. Or you flop a flush draw. You get in versus like an overpair. There's a lot of variance that will happen in those because of cold forwarding. It should increase your win rate with premium holdings, given that you're now wider preflop and people must defend wider versus you. So basically, it's like I've said, you balance your premiums with those bluffs, and it's very easy to play against someone who has a cold forbidding percentage of like 2%. You can just fold pretty much everything unless you're like deep, and when you're deep, it's really good because the other guy has a really big hand and you have good implied odds. But like, let's say you're playing 100 big blind poker, it makes life very easy for your opponent. So increasing your cold for betting percentage will kind of negate that advantage that your opponent would have if you were cold for betting at a lower rate. So this was episode number 2 for the mini course of Redline Mastery. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.